It's a closed shop. Those 6 nations are in the 6 nations. There's no promotion. There's no relegation. There's no jeopardy. There's no concern that someone could be relegated. And that is a huge problem. Look at any successful sport. Look at any successful league system. And of course, we're going to look at football here because football's the prevalent sport in the world. And it's been so utterly successful. You must have the jeopardy of relegation. So the first thing I would say is such an easy one. And that is you relegate the 6th place side. Or you relegate the 6th place side and then directly, and the 5th place side has a playoff against someone coming up. It gives a smaller European nation like a Portugal, a Spain, a Georgia, in which and in those countries, rugby's kind of more up and coming, the chance to compete. Would one of those sides get in the 6 nations and get absolutely battered every other week? Or possibly yes, but it is what it is, and I think that would be an obvious one. The second one, Ollie, is that nobody young watches terrestrial TV. Like, they don't have a BBC license. They don't watch TV. So you need to shift it all to a Netflix or an Amazon Prime where people actually have access to it. And by people, I mean the younger generation. Because if you don't take the younger generation, then you're not going to be able to grow the sport. So as I understand it, is it on terrestrial TV? 6 Nations? I think so.
ITV, I think, show it.
It's on ITV, right. Kids don't watch ITV. They don't even know what ITV is. So you move it to Amazon Prime or they honestly don't. Like they have no idea what these things are. So you have to move it to, and I know that's going to sting. And most of our listeners are kind of above the age of 30, I think. Shout out to the younger folk or the older folk. But most of our listeners are in the 30 to 40 bracket. And I know it stings, guys. But like young people do not have a TV license. They do not watch ITV. They don't use Google, by the way. They TikTok everything. They search everything by TikTok. If you want like the best steak restaurant in Buenos Aires, they go on TikTok. Check out our video on that, by the way. They don't go on Google.
I don't agree with anything that you're talking about at this point. I certainly
You're
believe...
such a purist, Ollie. You'd probably bring it back to the home nations, mate. You'd probably be like, we started this in 1883. You'd eject France and Italy and take it back.
It's like you're in my head. Have we become so predictable on NASP after just 32 episodes? Look, I'm here to make the 6 Nations great again, and we need to close the borders. We need to isolate it. No, what...
Tariffs on Italy and France.
So I understand what you're saying. Relegation promotion makes it more exciting. It gives it jeopardy, right? But the 6 Nations has never been about relegation and promotion in that sense. It's never been about jeopardy. As you say, it started with the home nations. It was about the home nations tussling it out for bragging rights. And again, let's go back to what we were talking about earlier. What makes sport great? Things like success, winning, trophies, and something like home nations bragging rights. Massively important thing. I mean, good friends of mine are English and an Irish woman, and their household during 6 Nations is always just really entertaining with like barbs at each other during it. My English mate's kind of getting annoyed, for instance, this week that his Irish fiancée is now got bragging rights over him for the next few weeks with Ireland beating England this weekend. And I wish we had more of that intensity around home nation kind of rivalry in the same way like in football. I'd love us to have a home nations competition. It would highlight, if England didn't win it, the disaster of the England football team continuing. But also it would just create that animosity again between the home nations in like a sporting factor. I don't want it to be Scotland, England and Wales at each other's throats all the time. But I like the idea of there being that, you're our neighbour and we're going to get one over you at some point. Bringing the French in, logical, it's just over the channel, etc. So, again, it made sense. There's a historical rivalry, of course, between England and France. It's, not everybody wants to see that kind of going back to colonial times and Napoleon, Battle of Waterloo, etc. But there's like a long-standing thing on that. And Italy made enough strides as a rugby nation to be prevalent enough that it's worth having them in there. I just think the whole thing, taking it almost away from terrestrial TV where nobody associates sport, I think might be one thing. Because I can't... Spanish football, I don't know anybody that watches that on ITV, unfortunately.
Spanish rugby or Spanish football?
No, Spanish football.
Yeah, right. So, they've got a few La Liga games a year, don't they?
Yeah, and they had a championship. They had the the Sheffield Wednesday Leeds game the other day on championship, etc. You didn't even know that they showed that. Yeah, Sunday afternoon they had a championship game on. So they've got a little bit of sport, but nobody associates ITV with sport anymore because we have become so locked in, as we touched on actually last week, of where do I go for Formula One? I go to Sky F1 because it's a channel dedicated to that. Where do I go for, Sky Rugby might be the way to go forward of giving Sky these rights and seeing what they do with it. The only thing is that not everyone has Sky. You're moving it away from making it open to everybody. There's got to be a better way to open it up to more viewing public without necessarily just handing the keys over to pay TV, right? It's a really difficult one because I wouldn't say let's give Portugal, let's give Spain a chance. The only nation that should be given a chance really is Georgia. If you look at the Rugby World Rankings, I did a little deep dive into this. Georgia is sat in 12th. Wales are 11th right now in the Rugby World Rankings. Italy are actually 10th, so they're above the Welsh. And you look at the last Rugby World Cup, and Italy finished third in their group, only 5 points behind the New Zealand and France, which is obviously a very difficult group to be in. But look where Georgia and Portugal finished. They had 6 and 3 points. Portugal finishing above Georgia, Wales top of their group, Fiji and Australia behind them. So actually, when it comes to big competitions, at least in the last Rugby World Cup, we're looking at the likes of Spain, Portugal, Georgia being way adrift. So expanding it to make more crap rugby isn't the way forward at all. We've seen that and said that about so many tournaments, including FIFA World Cups. Bringing in more teams, it grows the game, but it dilutes the quality of the game massively. And it means we have more games that fewer people actually want to watch more than anything else. So I think having a consistent rivalry of the Six Nations is the best thing to still happen and keeping it a closed shop. Now, a European Championships might be better to have something like that. I mean, we don't complain about Australia, New Zealand, South Africa having their rotation. Nobody says, the Southern Hemisphere needs to get more nations involved. Maybe some of the island nations like Fiji, Tonga should have their opportunities more often against the big boys, but there's very little complaining about that. I think just rugby has got its corner of the market sorted, and it's a bit like golf that it might just struggle to compete with the globalization of sport more than anything else, and it just might not have enough fans that makes it worthwhile, and that's okay. Knowing where you are is okay, and having a loyal fan base that love the sport, I think, is actually better than trying to open it up and make it an everybody's game type thing.
Does rugby just have... Is rugby in an impossible position, Ollie? Because the core element of rugby is big hits, is a physical game. On some level, even though it's a byproduct rather than a direct intention like boxing, like physicality is a huge byproduct of rugby. And in like a modern world that we live in, it's going to be extremely difficult to square that with a younger generation in terms of participation. And if you have no participation in a young age, then you're later going to have very, very little viewership. And maybe rugby can look towards the NFL here, no? Because obviously the NFL's kind of got I don't know, you tell me how they're dealing with the, concussions, and obviously this is a big topic, right? So how are rugby going to deal with the fact that parents do not want their kids to get bangs on the head? Like that... You don't want that as a parent, so less kids are going to be participating. And back in the day, it was obviously a bit more like, kids were, I don't know, come back by tea time, do what you want kind of thing. And it's a bit more, parenting's kind of changed and understanding of...
Send them out into the wild and don't play in traffic. But
it was something like that. They'll probably turn out okay. And now it's, now it's a little bit different, and rightfully so. Yeah, I don't know. The head injuries thing, is that not just an impossible situation for rugby to deal with?
No, because go and look at what boxing's doing with the celebrity boxing. Like, the kids love that. I mean, I remember being in Miami a number of years ago, and they had a Jake Paul KSI fight or something like that. This is very early on. We're talking like 2019, 2020 sort of period. And there was an actual boxing fight after this Jake Paul KSI undercard fight. And some people I know that went and said the number of kids that left after the undercard and didn't stick around to watch the main fight was insane. So boxing has worked out how to take a far more barbaric sport in terms of violence, head injuries, and long-lasting problems afterwards. And the YouTubers have gone to it because it's seen as that alpha male physical prowess, and then younger kids have attached it to that and gone, yeah, this is freaking amazing. Yeah, look at this. Rugby needs stars more than anything else. Like, I am not a huge rugby fan in terms of, again, when it comes around Six Nations, things like that. you and I are generally working on football. It's the middle of the season. We don't get enough time to sit down and watch it, maybe catch some highlights or the odd game if we're seeing friends or something. But I'll try and watch Rugby World Cups, etc. I knew who Johnny Wilkinson was. I knew who Jeremy Guscott was growing up. I knew who Lawrence Dallaglio was growing up. Yeah, I mean, like, I couldn't tell you a star face in that England rugby team right now, rugby union team, let alone I couldn't tell you a rugby league player.
Ollie, mate messaged me and said, history will be made on Saturday. This is on Friday. He sent me this. As Tom and Ben Curry become the first twin brothers to start a rugby test match together for England. The 26-year-old Sale back rows will line up against Ireland in the opening round. I mean, we should have known about that, right? And maybe we're not delving into rugby stories, but that's kind of fun. Like twins, twin brothers playing in an international game is kind of interesting. That's the kind of story. Like, why isn't there a documentary about that? Why isn't there Instagram at 1 million followers?
Well, that's look at Ilona Meyer. We were talking about her before we spoke about the Six Nations because she turned a social media marketing plan into a move into Bristol Bears and is now the face of women's rugby and getting more women and more young kids down to rugby. Bristol Bears are pretty much sold out, although, very cheap tickets, but sold out that first game that she was in because people know her from social media. You're talking about kids don't Google. Well, have a marketing plan that some of these athletes in rugby need to realise, I need to do something like this, not just for my own personal brand, but for sport as well. And I don't like it. I don't care personally in my generation about TikTok and Instagram or anything like that. I'm not going to follow Marcus Rashford or anybody on social media, but the younger generation are. And if you don't have faces to carry a sport, and again, someone like Michael Jordan back in the day with the NBA was huge because they had Larry Bird, they had Magic Johnson, and then the torch of being the face of that sport was passed to MJ. And it was so important to have that face, to keep that running. And it's something that the NBA is lacking a little bit right now, is that there's loads of kind of faces, but LeBron's 40 years old, it doesn't work. The NFL has Patrick Mahomes right now. He's the next face after Brady. The torch has been passed to him. The Americans understand that having that key great figure, just continuing the interest in the sport with the general fan, the person that transcends it. And we're very lucky in football that we get a lot of those players that transcend it. But rugby doesn't have that, I don't think, right now. And if I'm wrong, I could well be wrong, but I'm your general sports fan that loves sport. And if I don't know, that's a problem. I know who Ilona Meyer is. I don't know an England rugby player.
Yep, completely agree. Let me just read out some of the other stuff that my mate said because I thought it was quite interesting. Apparently, this is a big topic in Wales, how football has overtaken rugby as the national sport in Wales. And I'm just reading out some statistics here. Football surpassed rugby union in popularity and participation in Wales. A 2022 study revealed that 17% of Welsh adults play football, while only 8% now engage in rugby union. And among children, this is even more, the disparity is even more pronounced. 40% of kids play football and 14% play rugby. Obviously, more kids play sport in general. That's why that percentage is up. But that's a problem if you've got 40% of young Welsh kids playing football and 14% playing rugby. And it didn't used to be like that. I mean, rugby used to be the national sport of Wales, and it's not the national sport. I don't know. And presumably Wales is a reflection of quite a few other countries. So, difficult if you don't have kids participating in the sport, I think. And a couple of other things that piqued my interest were... Another thing you could do with rugby is there's obviously 15 players in rugby union, which makes for quite a tight game. There's lots of kicking. I mean, the last time you watched rugby, you wouldn't, there's not so much free-flowing, attacking, open rugby, great tries. This is a fundamental change. This is kind of a VAR type change to the sport. But if you took 3 players away and made it 12 on 12, which I know they've got rugby sevens, etc., you might create a more open field and possibility there. And then the other thing is there's a new red card system where player gets a red card in rugby now, 20 minutes off the pitch, replaced by someone else, rather than just losing a player for the rest of the game, which is designed to punish the player rather than the team, which I kind of like and dislike. It would never work in football, but for rugby, maybe it does.
What I think you need to make an amendment to that, and you have, 10 minutes with the team down a man, and then that player can have a replacement come on after those 10 minutes. I think that would be a better way to do it, rather than not gaining a numerical advantage at all. At the end of the day, if you've been sent off in rugby, like in football, you've done something pretty heinous. The team has to be punished for it as well as the individual, because it's not an individual sport, so it shouldn't be just the individual that takes the hit. It should be the team that still takes the hit, because you don't score a try and it doesn't go into Dave's column, it goes into England's column. So in the same way, anything negative that happens on the pitch has to be reflected on the team as a greater punishment. Because, again, the more we isolate individuals, the less it becomes about a team sport and the less we get those great stories of teams coming together to create something superb. Instead, we start just thinking about every individual player on an individual basis, and that's just not the point of team sport at all. And no great team has had terrible chemistry. There'll be an exception to that proves the rule kind of thing. But every great team has been built on a great team bond that then carries them through into greatness. So yeah, I'm not having that. That is genuinely a terrible idea.